He was walking around the battlefield, wielding a monkey wrench, swinging at any kid who got too close to him. Lana's heart began to beat faster as she quickly pulled out her bow and arrow and leaned against the parapet. The moment she had dreamed had finally arrived. Luckily, she figured out how to use a bow. She was a fast learner, but also accurate and deadly. She was Lana Loud. She slid the arrow into the bow and pulled the string back. Grease Monkey was completely oblivious to the presence. Lana was a little disappointed if it went alright. Grease Monkey wouldn't know what hit him, and would die without knowing what it was until it was too late, or who it was. Lana was about to let the arrow fly when she heard someone's voice. Lana! Lana released the arrow and it went flying towards Grease Monkey. It struck him in the shoulder and he quickly ducked down. Dang it! Lana said as she turned to see Lincoln, as well as Lucy and Lola. What? She said, intensely annoyed that her brother messed up her shot. What do you mean, what? Lincoln angrily said. Why did you sneak out of the closet and crawl all the way up here? What do you think? Lana retorted. I'm here to kill him. She pointed at the crowd towards Grease Monkey, who had pulled the arrow out of his shoulder and was now looking at her. Lana could tell that her eyes were filled with air. It was scary, but Lana smiled at him anyway. Are you nuts? Lincoln said, his voice filled with irritation and trepidation. What about what happened last time? Don't worry, Lana said, turning back to her brother. There was no way he'll be able to get up here. Lincoln was about to say something when Clyde emerged from the vents as well. Clyde, what are you doing? I thought I told you to watch Lily. Clyde's friend was sweaty and out of breath. Don't worry, he said. I left Lily with Penelope. Why didn't you come up after us? Lincoln asked. Clyde smiled. Come on, there is no way I was going to let you handle this by yourself. What kind of a friend would I be? Lincoln couldn't help but smile. He could always count on Clyde. He was his best friend. He always had his back no matter what, and nothing was going to change that. Lincoln then turned back to Lana, and his face became stern again. Come on, Lana. Are you really going to come quietly, or am I going to have to drag you? Lana fiercely shook her head. No, I have to do this. We're safe up here. They can't get us. Lincoln sighed. Lana had to point. It's not like the adults could climb walls or anything. Okay, he relented, but hurry up. Lana nodded and turned back. She was in the middle of taking another bow out and quiver and fight when all of her siblings gasped at once. She looked back to see all of them rushing towards her, with Lincoln at the lead. She then turned back towards the face-to-face with Grease Monkey. She didn't even have the chance to grasp up Grease Monkey, reach down and grab her. Lana screamed as she began to pull towards him. When Lincoln grabbed her by the arm, the other siblings and Clyde tried to help as well. Lana continued to scream and her siblings played a deadly game of tug-of-war. Lincoln and the others at once pulled out the Grease Monkey to make him lose his balance momentarily and gave him the upper hand. They fell backwards on their butts and bows and arrow, and Lana was flying right behind them. Grease Monkey went toppling towards backwards as well. Lana was on her feet in a second. How did he get up there? She asked no one in particular. I don't know, Lincoln said. Let's just get the heck out of here. This was a mistake, Lana. He tried to grab her arm, but she pulled away. No, I gotta see how he did that. Lana powered through her fears and hurried over to the edge again. Ignoring Lincoln calling after her, she then looked over the edge and was shocked to see the grown-ups were piling on top of each other, more like a human pyramid, and Grease Monkey was climbing them up. Lana couldn't believe how organized they were. Good thing they didn't even think of doing this sooner. Lincoln was right behind Lana and was about to drag her away when Grease Monkey popped up again. Apparently he was the only adult smart enough to climb up the entire pile. Lana screamed, and Lincoln suddenly shoved her away, putting himself between her and the Grease Monkey. The former mechanic suddenly grabbed Lincoln and lifted him up. Lincoln squirmed and tried to punch the adult, but it was useless. Lincoln! Everyone screamed as they ran towards him. Grease Monkey wasn't interested in the white-haired boy, he only wanted Lana, so he tried throwing him off the school, but Lincoln suddenly lashed onto his arm and wouldn't let go. The mechanic shook his arm, but Lincoln clung out tight. Run, he told his siblings, but they weren't going to abandon their brother. Lana reached up to her tool belt and pulled out the screwdriver with a pointy head. She charged at Grease Monkey and stabbed him in the leg. The mechanic grunted and turned to Lana and pecked her up with his free arm. Lana was still holding onto the screwdriver, stabbed him multiple times in the arm, causing him to let go, and Lana landed hard on her back. Lincoln didn't realize that she was no longer dangled over the edge of the school, quickly let go of the mechanic, causing him to fall hard onto his back. Clyde, Lucy, and Lola were trying to drag Lana away from the adult to help her to her feet. But now Grease Monkey was mad, and he was going to kill them all. He pulled out his monkey wrench and charged at them. They all screamed, and Clyde stood in front of them, willing to defend him off with his life. Lincoln was now on his feet, chased after the mechanic as he managed to grab him by the legs. Grease Monkey simply responded by kicking the white-haired boy in the face as hard as he could, knocking him flat. "Lincoln!" they all screamed in illusion. The mechanic then turned to him. His smiling, creepy smile marched slowly over towards him like a killer in a horror movie. This was it, Lana thought. Her absolute resolve to kill Grease Monkey was going to get her siblings killed. Even after being nearly killed last time, she didn't learn her lesson. Her siblings didn't deserve to die. If anyone deserved to die, it was her. Grease Monkey stood before her now, towering over them. He raised the monkey wrench again and was about to bring it down on Clyde when suddenly something small and yellow flew by the mechanic's head, startling them for a split second. Looked around, wondering what just flew by him. It was another projectile. Whatever it was flew past him. Grease Monkey was getting agitated as he kept flying around him. He swatted at it like a person would swat a bee that was buzzing around their head. But the only thing was, it wasn't a bee. It was a bird. A canary. "Walt!" Lana and her siblings exclaimed. The pet bird, they thought, was long gone, was right now in front of them, flying in circles around Grease Monkey. The grown-up angrily swung his wrench at the bird, but Walt was too fast. At one point, Walt even pooped on Grease Monkey, which made him even angrier. He really hated to be made a fool of. The mechanic was distracted by the bird. Lana suddenly remembered how the bow and arrow. She looked around and spotted him. She quickly ran towards and dove against him, picked up the bow and aimed with a one continuous motion. She took aim. Walt landed on Grease Monkey's head and pecked him in his right eye. The mechanic hissed and began to swim more furiously. Walt flew away and his job was done. Grease Monkey watched the bird flew away and held up his monkey wrench and shook it, as if they were saying, "Yeah, you better run, or fly." Grease Monkey then turned back to see the kids, and noticed Lana was no longer with them. When he saw that he was a few feet away from them, and as soon as he noticed her, it was too late for him. Lana just let the arrow fly and circled out with joy as the arrow struck Grease Monkey in the left eye. The front of the arrow was now sticking out of the back of Grease Monkey's head, and he just stood there shocked, his mouth slightly agape. He then dropped his monkey wrench, and slowly went trembling towards the end of the arrow as he fell over. Grease Monkey was never be able to hurt Lana or anyone else again. Lana was laughing manically now. She knew the last thing would be the last one smiling. Above them, Walt flew in circles like birds normally do over dead carcasses. When she noticed Lincoln lying still on the ground, he began to stir. "Lincoln?" they all cried once again. They all rushed over towards him as he lifted his head. "You okay, Linky?" Lana asked worriedly. "Yeah, I think so," he said. "What happened?" "I did it, Lincoln! I killed Grease Monkey!" Lana told him excitedly. "Really?" "Yeah!" After a few brief changes, Lincoln got up. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of here." And then they began to walk back towards the school. They had a vent crawling through for one day. Lincoln looked up and smiled and saw Walt flying overhead. He turned to Clyde, his best friend in the entire world. His siblings was now willing to risk his own life for them. Grease Monkey had charged them. "Thanks," Lincoln said to him. "For what?" Clyde asked. "For everything. For having my back. Ever since the beginning when the world went mad, you were there with me every step of the way. I'm glad to have you as a friend, man. You're one kind of a friend." Clyde smiled. "No problem, buddy." Lincoln was about to reach over and place a hand on Clyde's shoulder when suddenly something red and heavy struck his new friend's hard side of his head. More especially the temple, knocking off his glasses in his hand. Lincoln's heart nearly stopped when he saw his hand fell to the ground, completely motionless. He watched as blood began to gush heavily from his wound. Next, he had a brick landed weightly on the cord of the concrete of the roof. Lincoln's sisters all screamed at once, and Lincoln shifted his gaze from his best friend over the parapet. It felt like something was happening in slow motion. He saw a shirtless, muscular adult climbing over the parapet. Lincoln instantly recognized it was Brick. Lincoln clenched his fist angrily, and as hot tears began to form in his eyes, Brick had cocked his arms back and prepared to throw another brick. Lincoln stared him down, showing him that he wasn't afraid, but Brick didn't care. Instead, he threw the brick as hard as he could. Lincoln dodged and ended up slamming against the metal door that led to the back of the school. Lincoln was about to stare Brick down. Then Walt swooped down and tried to pick at Brick, but Brick snatched him with the lightning flexes and squeezed him until Walt's head popped out. Lincoln's sisters all screamed that brought him out of his state of fury. He turned back to him and helped him pick up Clyde. His friend was unconscious and bleeding profusely. "Inside now!" Lincoln yelled, and they all headed towards the door. Brick began to run after him, picking the brick that he threw at Clyde in the process. As soon as the door was open, Lola sprung forward and began to ran in with her siblings. As soon as Lincoln was inside, he turned and reached for the doorknob just to shut the door, catching a glimpse of Brick in the process. He had noticed his arm cocked back and threw the brick, but Lincoln slammed the door before it could be hit. Lincoln held the door shut as Brick began pounding on them. Unfortunately, there was no way for Lincoln to lock the door. Brick continued to pound on the door, and Lincoln and his sisters couldn't keep it shut much longer. His sisters were crying. Clyde continued to bleed heavily. This really seemed to be it for them. Brick was going to barge in and rip them apart. Then Brick stopped being on the door for a brief moment. Lincoln thought he gave up, but he slammed against the door with all of his might, nearly knocking Lincoln and his siblings away in the process. It was a close one. If they did fall over, they would have fallen down the stairs that led up to the door. That's when Lincoln had an idea. He turned to his siblings and told them to take Clyde down to the bottom of the steps and wait. "Wait? Why?" Lola cried. "What are you going to do?" "Just trust me," Lincoln said. Brick slammed against the door again. "Now, go, go, go," he told them. Lucy, Lana, and Lola wasted no time, propped Clyde up, draping his arms around his shoulders, and hurried down the steps. Lincoln was then reached for the doorknob and listened closely. As quiet as the first, he then heard the footsteps bounding towards the door. Lincoln then seized the moment and gripped open the door upright, and sure enough, Brick was about to slam into it. A shirtless, muscular adult charged right past him, violently tumbled down the steps, grunting and hissing on the way down. Lincoln quickly shut the door and charged on the steps after him. Lincoln's sisters screamed, and the entire Brick was falling. His plan worked. He had readied himself upon the upcoming plans for the fly, and this one wasn't as difficult as the first, but it worked. Brick was thriving, and Lincoln wasn't sure if these things would help feel pain, but he hoped they did. A broken bone was sticking out of Brick's leg, preventing him from standing up. Lincoln then noticed Brick was holding the same one he used to hit Clyde, lying on the ground. Lincoln then picked it up and pounced on Brick, who was now crawling towards his younger sisters. He hit Brick as hard as he could at the back of the head with the brick again, and again, and again. Blood was beginning to pour from his wounds, caused by immediately being hit with a heavy object. Brick then thrashed and began to buck Lincoln off of him, but even the 11-year-old was still relentless. He had kept hitting and hitting with all of his might. Eventually, Brick had stopped moving, but Lincoln didn't. He kept going until Brick eventually broke into two. Even then, Lincoln didn't stop. He kept going at it. Eventually, the Brick's head was cracked open and completely felt as if though Lincoln was smashing it into gelatin. "Lincoln!" a voice called out. Lincoln ignored it and continued to pulverize Brick. Smash, smash, smash. "Lincoln!" a voice spoke up again. "Lincoln!" a third voice called out, and felt someone grab him by the arm, which snapped him out of his rage. He looked to see Lucy holding him, a frightened look on her face from what she could tell. Hard to see behind the bangs behind her. Lana and Lola held each other with terrified expressions on their faces as well. "It's over, he's dead," Lucy said calmly. Lincoln then looked back at what used to be the back of Brick's head at the back. He sniffled and wiped tears away as Lucy helped them. He then went over to the twins and hugged them. asked them if they were all okay. They all nodded. Okay, good, he said. He needed to go over to Clyde and help them, as they all continued down the hall. The battle raging on. The ground was littered with dead bodies, practically eating kids and dead grown-ups. The blood of the fallen flooded the ground. Kids who were before the blast never picked up a weapon in their life were given it that they had to beat down the people who used to look after them. No matter what happened, no matter if they did won or win this battle, no matter who died, no matter who survived, nothing was going to be the same after today. Brock was well aware of this as he swung his baseball bat as he driven his nail bat into the dead grown-ups who no longer served as protectors but attackers. They were no longer guardians. They were enemies. He didn't care if he lived or died. He just wanted to beat the army to ensure the future of the kids of Royal Woods beyond. The kids were beginning to get overwhelmed. A lot of them were fleeing back to the school. Brock had one last trick up his sleeve. As he beat one grown-up, he looked back at the cars. He had made some of the kids move drastically at placed positions. That was going to be the final effort. They had once served their purpose too. He would have had to fall back to the school and help for the best. Several yards away, Joey was at the fight of his life against a large adult with a sledgehammer. The tower. He had gotten a few good hits at the large adult, but they did little effect to who was just they were strong. But Joey didn't give up. He never gave up. He was Joey freaking Moore, the strongest badass kid in Royal Woods. He wasn't about to lose to some guy with a sledgehammer. At that moment, neither Joey or Tower showed any signs of exhaustion. They were both going strong. Neither of them knew the definition of the word defeat. But still Joey was wary. Tower may have been able to withstand the strikes with the axe, but one good sledgehammer was all pretty much Tower needed to put the stubborn teen out of commission. Luckily, Joey was faster. He purposely got too close to the big man and dodged his swings as he got a good hit at the Tower missed. The one large adult was getting angry. It was too good for Joey. People tend to get sloppy when they're angry. One misstep was all Joey needed. He needed to get his bide this time. Thank goodness one of the adults was interfering in the fight. The Tower must have been so proud to ask for help in one unmeasly teen. Once the fight started, all the other adults backed away. Apparently none of them wanted to get in the Tower's way. At least they suffered the same fate as Randy. "Come on, you big green asshole!" Joey shouted as he prompted a Tower to charge at him. He raised his hammer and swung downwards with all of his might. He was fast, but still, Joey was faster. He jumped on backwards and he one misjudged how far back the jump he had failed, failing over Randy's corpse, dropping his axe in the process. The Tower seized at the moment and raised his sledgehammer again, ready to bring down all of his fury on the defenseless team. Joey's eyes widened as he, for the first moment of his life, he felt fear. Duke had to keep psyching himself again and again. He stopped getting scared and get closer and closer to the front of the school, to where he exited the building and entered the danger zone. It was going on for several minutes, but he needed to be brave for his family. He needed to be brave for everyone. He gripped his beard and continued to run down the hall, eventually searching the foyer. It was an absolute madness. Sanjay, who acted the school's doctor, was working tirelessly with Eve, who was the girl currently the doctor of the middle school before they came here. Brian Allen was helping them too. He was a genius after all. He knew so much about the human body as Sanjay and Eve, and with him as Norman, none of the kids from Indiana apparently was always had an interest in learning about the human body, and it was good enough for Sanjay to ask them to help out with it. Duke had studied the injured kids. There were some kids with small cuts, while others with deep lacerations that wouldn't stop bleeding. Some of the kids, however, didn't even look injured. They just sat around crying. He just saw one of the uninjured kids was Shade, a kid who was high, like 99% of the time. He was babbling incoherently and kept putting his hands to his face as he shook his head. Duke then noticed Stan kneeling down next to a girl who was holding a piece of cloth to her cheek. It was dark red, but Duke knew that it was because the blood was gushing from the girl's cheek. That's when Duke recognized that girl was Mary, one of the kids who had shown up. with Zeke and the others from the church. Stan then called out to Norman to help. Since Sanjay and Eve were busy with the injured kids, the boy rushed over with the first aid kit. Duke, who heard Stan, told him that Mary was struck by the adult with a chain. Norman knew when to ask him to move the cloth away from her cheek, sucked in the air through his teeth, and studied the injury. The wound started to close right in her ear and traveled right down to the corner of her mouth. "Damn, he must have got you good," he said to the girl, and Stan then gave him a shocked look. "Shut up and help her," Stan demanded, pretty much shouting. All right, Norman startled. He then reached into his kit for something to clean the gash. Stan then placed a hand under Mary's hand so he can rest her on the floor too. Her tears had stopped, but her blood hadn't. She was beginning to have trouble staying conscious. Norman hurriedly cleaned her wound and then took out a thread and needle to stitch her up. "I'm no expert," Norman said as he began to study her wound, "but I'll do the best I can. No doubt this thing is going to have a nasty scar once this is over." Stan swore and then spoke the words of encouragement to Mary. Duke was ashamed. Mary had risked her life fighting, even he had almost had her executed. That gave him almost intensively he needed. He began to make quickly towards the door. Doug was standing next to it, guarding it. He noticed that Duke was making his way over and narrowed his eyes at him. "Well, look who finally decided to—" Duke forcefully shoved him out the way before he could finish his sentence, causing him to fall land on backwards with a hard floor oof that sounded like a roadblock's death sound. Duke was now outside, standing right before the battle was taking place. All around he saw the kids giving it away all they had against the demons that had been tormenting the past several weeks. He had scanned the area searching for a target to unleash his newfound courage on. That's when he saw him, Joey, his best friend, the entire world with a large, towering adult. The tower, no doubt. Duke wasted no time. He held his pistol in one hand and gripped the spear in the other, charged into the battlefield, running past several fleeing injured kids, past several kids who were still fighting, past the first green who had reached for him, only to quickly dodge it. He then quickly bellowed over the green and began to whip at the other greens that had reached out for their blood-soaked hands. He spared over several of them and their adults, and their few pops at the gun when he got overwhelmed. The greens were kept pawing and clawing at him, but he just plowed through the greens like a running back. Joey needed him, and he wasn't going to let his friend down. It got to the point where Duke's gun ran out of bullets, so he just used it at the closest green's head, powered through the horde, and armed with only a spear now, trying to not trip over the dead bodies or slip on the blood-stained grass. The sound of his friends fighting, and the large adult was getting closer and closer. Duke continued to strike, jab, and stab until he finally made it through the mess. Joey was on the ground staring up at the tower, was about to bring down the sledgehammer to his friend. Duke yelled and ran up as he could. The tower then drove the spear right at the side of the tower's body. The lofty adult grunted. He turned his head to face Duke and backhanded him, sending him stumbling backwards. Duke saw for a split second later, felt his palms on the evergreens pressed against the back of him to catch him when he fell forward. Duke's final step faltered. He was shoved, but quickly caught himself. There was no way he was going to fall. He then turned and swore his debt to the adults, who pushed him and then sent him back to the tower, who was in the middle of removing the spear from his body. And then at that moment, Duke realized now how small he was compared to the adult. The courage had been powered him through the mob of grown-ups quickly drained from his body, only to be replaced by the tears as the adults, like a young fan, looking up at the basketball player that strutted past him. The tower then studied the play paper unimpressed. To him it was nothing more than a stick. He then shifted his gaze up to Duke, who trembled in his shoes. "I'm sorry," Duke said in a shaky voice. He wasn't apologizing to the tower, though. He was apologizing to his family. He was apologizing to every kid that died. He was apologizing to every kid who lost something. Every kid who had been wrangled into this mess, fought his heart out while he was too scared to do anything. His heart was then shoved the spear into Duke's chest until the point was completely sticking back at them. Then he shoved Duke out of the way and landed on the ground, slowly sliding down until the spear that impaled him. He saw the blue sky and then saw the angry scowling faces of Greens begin to swamp him. He then saw darkness. "No!" Joey shouted, as he saw his best friend was impaled and devoured by Greens. Duke had saved him from being crushed by the tower of his own life. The tower then turned back to Joey and raised him his sledgehammer, but the teen grabbed his axe with the lightning speed and was crushed down by the towering grown-up. Then striking him with his left arm, Joey had heard a bone snap in the adult's arm. He had lost the grip on the sledgehammer and nearly dropped it. He was holding it with his right arm now. Joey took another swing, but the tower ended up blocking it with his hammer, deflecting it. He rammed his head into the sledgehammer into Joey's face, hitting him in the mouth, with his head whiplashed back. With his two front teeth went flying out of his mouth, causing his gums to bleed. Joey was stunned by the sudden blow. The tower sighed as if his chance was about to swing his weapon at the teen was a good arm then. Suddenly there was a loud boom. Everyone was shocked away by the sudden shockwave. Joey could feel his heat wave travel through his body from where the sudden blast had came from. He looked, saw one of the cars that Brock had made everyone move was now on fire. A loud boom suddenly made sense. Brock must have set up the bombs up on the cars. Joey then saw that the tower of several adults were trying to get back up. That was when the explosion made them all flinch. Then there was another explosion, and another, and another. All the explosions were blowing up the Greens into smithereens. Soon the explosions stopped. The battlefield was littered with bits and pieces of dead grown-ups, but there were still several Greens remaining. The battle was still far from over. The tower angrily shot up, grabbed his sledgehammer, as he was angry that he hadn't been knocked down, but not that it was Joey's fault. He wanted to take his anger out on someone, and now Joey was someone. Joey was fed up. His adrenaline was wearing and he was tired. The tower was blinded by rage that was just what Joey was hoping for. Remembering what he fought earlier, people getting careless and they're mad. Joey lifted his axe and threw away at the tower like a tomahawk. The large adult wasn't expecting Joey to do something bold, which could have been, after all, he did take on a one-on-one fight. The head of the axe struck. The sound of the tower right in his face, firmly placed it himself on the skull. The force of the blow knocked him back like an almighty oak tree, landing on a few weaker Greens, who struggled to get it out from underneath him. Joey laughed harder, as he ever had been, before the under both in the middle fingers. He then finally suddenly succumbed to his exhaustion and fainted. Everyone was caught up by the guards with the explosions, not even Chris. "What the hell was up with these kids?" he shouted. Not even Crony had an answer for that one. He had noticed that his army was getting weaker, and could sense their lieutenants had fallen. It was just him and Chris now. There were still plenty of adults left, so as long as they both stayed alive now, they were on their way they could lose. The kids were getting tired, and there was no way they could win. Hopefully the kids still not have any more tricks up their sleeve. The very last of the car bombs had gone off, yet there was way still too many Greens. Brock was tired and his body entirely ached, and the wave of grown-ups were overwhelming. Those bombs were the last-ditch effort, one final attempt to prove futile. The adults were still surging forward, blinded by the desire to consume anyone. It was over. The only thing there was left to do was retreat. Luna's ears were ringing. She knew Brock and his buddies had something to do with the cars, but she wasn't expecting that. She was caught off by a tangle of limbs from dead adults. She and Sam were so lost in their battle they didn't even realize how gotten close to a car that had been armed with a bomb. She couldn't find her axe. Everything was a blur to her and she turned around. Then her vision finally came back to focus and noticed Sam lying conscious under a dead woman's body whose head was missing. Luna lifted the body off of her and her friend's face was cut up and she looked to be alright. She looked at Sam frantically with her eyes shot open and threw in a punch. Luckily it missed Luna. Luna told her friend that they had to hurry back to the school as she helped her to her feet. Sam looked at for her sword, but it too had vanished into the carnage. The oldest of the Loud sister looked around for Lynn and Luann, hoping that they weren't ripped apart, devoured, or blown into pieces. She told her friend to run back and go find her younger sisters. Luann was lost in the middle of a large grown-up racking frenzy when the explosions brought her back down to earth. She and Maggie were both knocked down by the blast, but unharmed as soon as the blast rained out. The comedian noticed several kids running back to the school. Apparently, they all realized that it was now over their heads of where they were. Luann was starting to get scared again. They were all admitting defeat. Were they just going to run and hide in the school till the adults eventually got ransacked the place? Maggie had a hand on Luann's shoulder as she turned to her. Maggie was now just as scared as Luann. "We need to go back," she said in a cold, deadpan voice. "And then what?" Luann asked. Maggie just shook her head. "I don't know." As much as Luann wanted to run back to the school, she knew she had to find her sisters first. She told Maggie and this dark-haired girl just to side off with her knives, ready to help Luann yet again. Lynn was knocked down by the shockwave just like everyone else, but at the same time she got back up. She wasn't going to let some dumb explosion keep her own. Her heart was still pumping fast, sweat was pouring down at her like ran water running down a window, and her arms were still swinging like mad. "Lynn!" a voice yelled. Lynn recognized the voice as Cooper's, but she ignored it. Eventually the voice grew more and more urgent as the voices were now shouting her name. "What?" Lynn screamed as she ran and saw Luna and Luann looking at her with complete and utter fear in their voice. "We need to head back to the school," Luna yelled. "Fuck that," Lynn said. "I'm not running away." "Lynn, please," her older sister urged. "You can't kill all of them. Watch me." Luna swore and ran up to her younger sister, grabbed her before she could take another swing at the adult. Lynn began to kick and scream to let her go. Luann went to help her sister carry Lynn away. "No!" Lynn cried. "I can't run away. I'm not a coward." She was at the verge of tears. Luna screamed at Lynn to get her to shut up and then spoke to her softly. "Please don't die out there. We want you to be with us. Everyone together." Lynn understood what she meant and stopped struggling. She knew it was hopeless, but to keep fighting. Nothing was going to stop the Greens now. They were outnumbered, 50 kids to 1, and that was just optimistic estimate. They all ran back to the school as fast as they could, and was most likely going to be their final resting place. Lincoln and his siblings could hear the explosions reverberating through the walls of the school as it carried Clyde to the foyer, where Sanjay and the others would be. "What was that sound?" Lola asked worriedly, as she grabbed Lincoln's hand. "I don't even know," he said, trying his best not to sound scared. "Just keep going." They eventually passed by the door of the closet where they were hiding. A bunch of kids ran out. Penelope walked out still holding Lily and went over to Lincoln. "What happened?" he asked, when suddenly he smelt Lily had pooped in her diaper. Penelope was about to hand Lily over to him when he spotted Clyde and asked him what happened. Lincoln had told her what it looked like. She was about to cry once he was finished. "Lucy, take Lily from her, please," he said to his younger sister, who did what she was told. Then Lincoln felt something pawing at his leg. He looked down to see his dog Charles looked at him with worried eyes. Even that was telling something was wrong. Lincoln didn't say anything. They just continued down the halls. They eventually reached the foyer, where several other kids injured as well. Lincoln laid Clyde down to look while she looked for Sanjay to help. When he returned with the wannabe doctor, Sanjay asked what putrid smell was. Lincoln sighed and both asked Lana to change Lily's diaper and throw it out. In the meantime, Sanjay studied Clyde's wound and sore. Blood was beginning to seep from Clyde's ears now. Lincoln was refused to see blood gushing from Clyde's nose. Seeing it pour from his ears was a completely different story. "Help him!" Lincoln urged. Sanjay studied Clyde for a few more seconds, then finally looked at Lincoln with a hopeless expression. "There's nothing I can do." It felt like Lincoln had been punched through the gut, with the head into the heart. Lucy and Lana and Lola gasped. "What?" Lincoln asked with blood tremble. "I'm sorry, Lincoln, but blood's coming out of his ears. I can treat a cut or small wound, but something like this is about to my knowledge." Lincoln stammered, tried to speak in coherent sentence. Sanjay then pointed to where Lincoln told him that Clyde had been hit with the brick. "Do you see where he was struck?" he said, referring to Clyde's temple, where the blood was continuing to gush out. That was the tiniest part of the skull that was a major artery behind it. It looked like it had been severed. It was hopeless. "Boo-boo?" Lily asked. Lana cradled her in her arms. The baby was no longer wearing a diaper, but could sense the temperate atmosphere as well. Charles the dog whines as well. What? No, please, Lincoln begged. Me and him have been through a lot of hell back, but he can't die. Not like this. I'm sorry, Sanjay said. All you can do now is use the little time you have left to say goodbye. With that, Sanjay got up and left. All of this time, Lincoln's younger sisters were crying. Lincoln tried his best to fight tears when he heard Clyde speak. Lincoln? His voice came out of his hoarse whisper. Lincoln then leaned in, and his hands fans into his. What is it, buddy? Are your sisters okay? Lincoln nodded. Yeah, they're all right. He turned to his younger sisters and stepped up. Lana spoke. Clyde, I am so sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't gone out to the roof. She began to sob harder now. Don't blame yourself, Clyde told her. None of this is your fault. If I chose to follow you to the roof, I'd do it again. Lana sniffled. Do you remember the time I was stuck in a tree and you saved me, despite the fact that you were afraid of heights? Clyde smiled significantly as he remembered. Lincoln smiled too. He couldn't ask for a better friend. He was glad he ran into them that Heptide Halloween night 6 years ago. He was chasing after Lynn and ended up bumping into him, giving him a bloody nose. Lincoln was willing to lend a helping hand. He let him use his cape of his Ace Savvy costume to press against his nose. However, there was nothing Lincoln could do to help his best friend, other than be with him for the last moments. The older Loud siblings ran into the school and didn't have time to look back to see their younger siblings. Lola cried out their names and rushed over to them, jumping into Luna's arms sobbing. Luna patted her on the back and gave her words of reassurance. Luann and Lynn walked over to the rest of the siblings. Lucy and Lana and Lily joined in the embrace as the younger siblings saw. Lincoln looked happy to see them, but there also seemed to be hurt in his eyes. They saw that Lincoln's shirt was stained with blood and that kneeling towards an injured Clyde. What happened? Luna asked. But Luna spoke up before Lincoln could say anything. She had told him about how she went on the roof and managed to kill Grease Monkey, and about how Brick tried to hurt Clyde. Now Lincoln managed to kill Brick. The older Loud siblings looked upset with their younger siblings, but they were just glad that they were okay. So what's happening out there? Lucy asked. Yeah, Lola said. What's with all that noise? And what about the grown-ups? The older siblings then looked at each other at the doors as the doors were closed and shut. The room was once again lit up by only a few candles and a battery-powered lanterns. What's going on? Lola asked. Did we win? Before her three eldest siblings could say anything, there was a heavy thud against the door as the first Greens reached for it. The sound of several hands beating against the door filled the entire foyer. Several other kids began to yell and swear while the younger kids began to cry and scream. They're going to get in! Lola cried. Luna held the blonde closer and walked over to Lincoln and sat next to him, drawing Lily closer to the process. Then Luann put a hand on Lucy's shoulder, offered the little goth girl a smile, and led her next to Luna. Then Lynn grabbed Lana by the hand and led her next to Luann. They were all sitting huddled together like the time they were hiding in the basement when that tornado rolled past their house. What are we gonna do? Lana asked tearfully. Lynn then hushed her in close. Are they gonna get in? Lucy asked Luann. Luann rubbed her hand against Lucy's cheek, wiping the sweat away. Don't sweat it, Luann told her, with a soft giggle. I'm so scared, Lola sobbed. Luna then patted her on the back and wiped her cheeks. No more tears, sis. Then the Greens began to tear at the boards that were nailed against the windows of the frames. Several kids used their spears to beat the grown-ups away, and it did little had effect. All the while the doors were beating on the doors became more aggressive, causing the double doors to rattle violently. Stan was still next to Mary, whose cheek was all stitched up now. Not that it mattered at this point. Matt was next to her, holding her hand and crying. And at that moment Stan wondered about his sister Sally. He pondered what was worse, being cut in half or being torn from limb to limb. Cooper just leaned back against the wall waiting for the inevitable. Maggie stood close to Luann with her knees drawn to her chest. She closed her eyes and let the tears flow. Sam hugged her brother Simon tight, telling him that she was going to protect him no matter what. Brian Ellen, the smartest kid in Royal Woods, had no idea what to do. Sanjay stood next to Eve, the girl who was a doctor at the middle school. Both of them were hoping that being ripped apart wouldn't be as hurt as much as they thought they would. Lexi stood next to Norman, who was sitting and crying. She told him that Ethan was dead and wasn't so sure if she was crying with him, or the fact that they were all about to die. Brock stood next to Aubrey. She grabbed his hand and they looked at each other. As he looked at his cousin Gage, who was crying, Brock wished that he had a camera to take a picture. Then he heard a heavy banging sound from down the hall, most likely from the other end of the school. He knew the sound that could be Luann's traps going off, which could only mean one thing. The adults had gotten into the school. Shay took out a joint and lit it. He had inhaled deeply in pride. Lord, give me the strength and wit to shout out the choke in it. I'm being ripped apart and eaten. All they waited, accepting their fates. No way out. Nothing was going to save them.